thanks everyone for being here. I was just semi-joking with Shanella that this must be Canadian content because she's from Toronto, Interac. I actually, until 4 weeks ago, spent my entire adult life in the Toronto area. Recently relocated to Calgary, Alberta, which is kind of cowboy country in Canada, so there is a common thread between Dallas and Calgary, and I think it's the oil sands, things like that. So I can't really see hands, but how many people know of, have heard of EMVCo? Well, sure, the PCI folks, sure. But lots of hands, so that's good. I don't need to spend that much time on this particular slide, but I will because it's here. So what our mission is to facilitate worldwide interoperability of secure payment transactions by developing, publishing EMV specs. So that's kind of we've got 4 pillars. The first one is specifications. And I say that kind of lightheartedly, like facilitate the worldwide interoperability. In the early 1990s, there were, of course, ISO standards, ISO 7816 for anybody that cares. On the contactless side, 14443, 18092, blah, blah, blah. And interestingly, there was a project going on in France and there's a project going on in the UK. And to prove that there is a long history of love and collaboration between those 2 jurisdictions, the UK issued cards did not work in French point-of-sale terminals, nor did French cards work in British point-of-sale terminals. So the E, the M, and the V are EuroPay, MasterCard, Visa. Those 3 organizations got together and said, if we're going to go from a less secure magnetic stripe to a more secure chip-based technology, let's, for goodness sakes, make sure that it's interoperable and secure so that we no longer need to go halfway across the world, go to a bank branch, get traveler's checks, show passports, all those sorts of things. So I think we've done a reasonably good job with that. Now, the E and the M sort of merged in around 2002, but since then we've added on, I'm supposed to do this alphabetically, American Express, Discover, JCB, since I've already mentioned MasterCard, Union Pay next, and I've also mentioned Visa already. So those are the organizations that manage the EMVCo group now. What we also realized early on was that approvals and evaluations were important. So there could be a company in Australia making cards, there could be a company in Canada, France, wherever, making point-of-sale terminals, and specifications are, like so many things, open to interpretation. So with approval and evaluation, we had a high level of certainty that cards, terminals, ATMs, and as we progressed into other areas, would actually work with a great certainty wherever you went in the world. And hopefully anybody who's traveled, and I'm sure lots have traveled here, you find that your card works, your phone works, your watch works. Knock on wood, that's because of the people that came years before me and did all this great work. We also have EMVCo marks, which the most common one is that contactless sort of radial mark. We manage those not because it's just fun to do, but because we do run into instances where, like at a transit location, somebody may misuse those marks and people will come along with their open payment card, think that they can get in the transit turnstile, tap their card, it doesn't actually open, you get kneecapped, it's not a lot of fun. So we do, when we hear about those things, send out a friendly notice saying, could you use a different mark, because we actually have a mark registered that means something for payment, which includes payment enter turnstile. So that's just an example, but other marks include click to pay, which is based on secure remote commerce, things like that. The 4th pillar, I like to say, is the fun bit, the industry engagement and collaboration. That's when I get to speak at conferences like this. And while I'm here for about 20 minutes speaking, I get the real insights, hopefully meeting you all at the reception tonight or at networking breaks afterwards, where you tell me what it is that we're hopefully doing well, what we can use improvement on and enhance and things like that. I see a couple of people already saying they know what we can do better, and I know what you're going to say. In terms of what we have accomplished over the years, there's nearly 15 billion chip cards in circulation at this moment. So I think a pretty good job overall there. 71% of all issued cards have a chip in them, and the question might be, hey, this is ubiquitous now. The cards that are not tend to be gift cards, reload or prepaid cards, things like that. So when you actually look at the percentage of transactions, it's over 96% globally that are chip to chip at this point. We have 79 associates. I'll get into that a little bit more later. In terms of approved and evaluated products, over 11,000, and just in this past year, there have been 1,150 new ones. We have working groups, and so for those that are, we've got the card, terminal, 3DS, SRC, electric vehicle. So we have 20 of those working groups, 359 subscribers, which is sort of a next level down from associates. Qualified test tools, 178, and recognized labs. We don't do the testing ourselves. That goes to recognized labs, and we have 82 of those. Now, this is a quick snapshot of the 79 associates that I just mentioned. I was semi-joking before that, this is Canadian Content Hour. So Interac is in there, sort of middle gold, but we also have a really nice cross-section, not just of chip manufacturers, point-of-sale vendors, card vendors, 3DS suppliers, SRC suppliers, but also a nice geographic mix between North America, Asia, and Europe as well. And while we have 79, we're always open to others that are interested in joining. So again, if so, let me know. This one, particularly for this audience, I think is as important as the 79 associates. We work on a variety of things, and when we started off with cards and terminals, the member organizations know that space very well. As that concentric circle expands into different areas, we know less about the areas that we're operating in. So the second from the top left up there, Sharin, is particular to electric vehicle open payment charging. So they've been extremely helpful as we're working on those specifications in terms of helping us understand their ecosystem, what the pain points are, and what we can do to hopefully come up with a specification that will work for all their constituents. FIRA helps us with ultra-wideband, FIDO, obviously a well-known entity. And what we want to be very careful of is that EMVCo is not going down one path and another specification or standards organization is going down a path that's close but a little bit different, that would, in a worst-case scenario, make potential solutions unimplementable, if that's a word, and or make it more difficult for those trying to implement. So we want to be where possible as aligned, and of course very germane to this particular meeting, PCI, SSC we work closely with as well, W3C, etc. So on to key initiatives that we're working on. Reduced range approval process. So we came out with a reduced range, and this is particularly around TapToMobile. So folks have mobile phones. What we did find was that in consumer research, people were having some difficulty knowing how close to hold their card or their phone. So we came out with requirements around how far away that transaction needed to happen. We always had that, and it's kind of 4-centimeter range for the traditional point of sale, but the read ranges vary greatly depending on the handset, et cetera. So we did all of that, but what we didn't have was an approval process in place. So that's something that we've done and completed recently. Another one is the contactless kernel. One of the things that we heard very loudly from the merchant side is there's such a proliferation. I think the study we did showed that there's 19 or 20 contactless kernels. So not only those from Amex, Discover, Visa, MasterCard, JCB, et cetera, but like Interac has their own contactless kernel. So that becomes quite difficult if you're a global organization and you want to accept contactless across all of those networks, but you may have to go through a multitude of certifications. So we came up with the EMVCo contactless kernel in 2022, but we hadn't yet come up with the approval process. So that was done late last year, and now labs are spinning up, et cetera, on that. We are an organization a few years older than PCI, so we last year celebrated our 25th anniversary, so now we're in our 26th year. There are certain things that existed in our specs from the 1990s that frankly were either never used or are no longer being used by anybody, but they were still being tested for, et cetera. So we are sunsetting some of those features. I'm trying to remember some of them, but like literally never used since the inception. So why test for them, et cetera. So we're trying to optimize that as much as possible. One of our advisors came to us and said, hey, it would be very helpful if within the point of information identifier, we could know which transit operator we're dealing with, because each one has its own separate rules. So, be it SEPTA, WMATA, MTA, et cetera. there's now an indicator that lets the merchant, the acquirer, et cetera, know who the transit operator is that they're dealing with so that they can apply in their backend various rules. And finally, L3 testing framework, we came out with some participant system guidelines to help try to streamline that process. In terms of what we've done in the 3DS, I've got 2 slides on 3DS. I think they're a little bit reversed, so I'll just talk about 3DS now and sort of skip that slide later if you're wondering why I'm skipping it. But you know, FIDO's done a lot in the last few years, whether it's with passkeys, et cetera, and it can be used to great effect with 3DS, but we needed to come up with some guidance on how people could implement that. So we have done that. We've come up with a white paper on frictionless, out-of-band, and recurring transaction, and there's 2 different flavors of that white paper. The first one, and you know, we should probably have done this a long time ago, the first one was a static PDF. We now have a dynamic version, so if you're looking for a specific bit of information, you don't have to page by page scan the whole thing, but you can actually just dynamically click and it'll bring you to the exact part that you want to see and actually show with some flows and things like that. So I think a fairly nice step up. We introduced this past year something called attribute verification. Though in my instance, maybe not all that applicable, except nobody knows online if I'm trying to buy alcohol if I really am 21 years old. If you see me in person, it's kind of obvious that that threshold passed like 4 decades ago. But with attribute verification, you can now use that out-of-band authentication to do more than just make the transaction more secure. You can, in fact, use it to identify that I might be of age to purchase a certain type of good, such as alcohol. Came up with 3DS wrapped SDK best practices. And the final one here, and I think Shanella just referenced this as well, quite importantly, how the European Union Digital Identifier wallet can be used with 3DS. And as it turns out, it can be used without any changes. So kudos to the team, the working group on 3DS, for having sort of future-proofed it up to that point. But it's not just going to be the EUDI bucket of data. It will be in the US, the mobile driver's license. In Canada, it will have its own flavor. So we're monitoring as best as possible all of these various iterations so that we can hopefully get to a point where the digital identifier can flow seamlessly into 3DS and provide even a better level of authentication in terms of approving, hopefully, that transaction. We spent a fair bit of time this past year as well. One of my remits is oversight of communications. And at times we do a good job, usually when somebody comes knocking at our door and says, what are you guys doing with security? But we probably haven't been proactive enough. So we, this past year, came out with biometric on-card security guidelines. We came up with a software-based mobile payment security evaluation methodology, quantum computer position paper, because that, depending on the month of the year, raises up and says what's going on with quantum and what's EMVCo's take on it. And we have the annual RSA and ECC key length reviews. And to the right there, you'll see we've come out with a quick resource guide, EMV Insights post on how EMV Chip is addressing cybersecurity and payments. And we also have a video on cryptography and EMV payments. So all of these are available on our website and I think are fairly well done in explaining what it is we do and how it is we work on the security aspect of things. This is going to be another quick question. How many people here have driven an EV, have an EV, have charged an EV? Smattering? I have it since 2016, and I can tell you that the genesis of the electric vehicle open payment project was that it can become quite a friction point when you come up to that charger, and I know that Tesla does it fairly well. Others, it's sort of a mishmash, but in many instances, and as a Canadian, big country, not that many people, I have 11 different charging apps that I've downloaded onto my phone. So there, you name it, I've got them. 4 or 5 of those, I've preloaded funds onto them because I had to. So the problem statement was, how can we make this better? I mean, I come up to a charging station, I'm in Northern Ontario, I'm not getting data, I need to charge my car. However, I'm not getting service to download that app, and there isn't an ability to tap an open loop payment card on that device. Potential issue, and therefore potential inhibitor to adoption of electric vehicles. So what our goal here was, you plug in the car, and you've already got communication based on another ISO standard, 15.11.8, that says, how much charge can the car take, et cetera. Well, it's communicating. Why not have a credential in the car within the infotainment system that you've preloaded or on your phone? And then the hopefully simple task is I plug in, it says, okay, this is going to charge you 50 cents per kilowatt hour. Would you like it to be on card A, B, or C? And you click on the one that you prefer, and then the charge starts, the payment happens, and it's hopefully as seamless as so many of our other payments are now. But at this current state, we still get that real hodgepodge of payment for charging. On SRC, which is Secure Remote Commerce, we came up with some user experience guidelines and consumer experience guidelines. What we were finding was that the spec itself was relatively good, but it was being implemented differently across merchants, across acquirers, across issuers, across everybody in the ecosystem. So when a consumer, who's I think the common point of who we all care about, came to a Secure Remote Commerce, which the icon is click to pay, they clicked to pay, and it looked different depending on which merchant you are at and which issuer you're having. So what we're trying to do with these guidelines is say, hey, if you want to follow a guideline to provide the consumers some familiarity and similarity between one checkout experience to the other, then here's guidelines to follow. I should have noted on that first slide, I sort of said all the things we do. It's very important what we don't do, because we often get asked, hey, 3D Secure is going great in Europe. Why doesn't EMVCo mandate it in North America? Well, we don't do mandates. We don't do liability shifts. That tends to fall into the commercial realm of the likes of the payment systems or specific jurisdictions. I think as referenced in the prior presentation, the PSD2 and strong consumer authentication in Europe. That's really what drove 3DS in that market, not any other. That wasn't EMVCo saying, hey, Europe, we think you're special and you should implement that. In terms of what we're doing or what we've been doing in 2025, addressing new trends in payment initiation and authentication, so that hits to the 3DS space that I've talked about. We've continued collaboration on EV open payments. In fact, if you are an associate, you will have seen that we've released draft specifications. So those go through a disposition of comments. It's gone to associates now, I believe subscribers as well, which means that soon it will be open for public comments. So we try to be as transparent as possible. All of the comments that come in, we do respond to, we do think about, and particularly from the Sharin project that we're running, we're getting a lot of input from those that aren't typically in our sphere of influence, which tend to be the OEMs from the auto manufacturer space, et cetera. Improving access to EMV publications. I noted that we'd had that one 3DS white paper that we made dynamic. We're looking to do that across a number of our white papers going forward so that they are much more accessible. Optimizing EMVCo approvals and evaluations. That's around, to a certain extent, the sunsetting of some features, but also where possible, we want to make that as hopefully seamless as possible. And evolving cryptography and EMV payment security. So, we've already done publications of moving from RSA to ECC and from TripleDIS to AES, et cetera, but we naturally need to keep monitoring and publishing what's going on in that space. This is the 3DS slide I said I would skip over, so I will hold to my word. I think if you've already seen April 2024, we published the 3DS white paper that talks about frictionless, challenge flow, improved out of band. This year, we added on a number of things to that white paper that, as noted, was made dynamic as well. So WebAuthn and secure payment confirmation. I've got a slide on that, and as my time's running down, I'm going to skip that. We also have a 3DS requester initiation, split SDK, message extension implementation, and delegated authentication, and more. So there's a ton of work going on in the 3DS space. This is the one I said I'd skip over because I just talked on that. Evolution of consumer card acceptance. This is where we align quite closely or had over the past few years with PCI. Anytime over, in the last 20 or so years, it was a very much a fit-for-purpose point-of-sale terminal. Then there's that awkward few years where merchants were connecting dongles to phones and you could pay on the dongle. Now we've evolved to a off-the-shelf mobile device where the read range became important. And I should note that while we have published read ranges, those aren't meant to remain static. What our goal is if it says 2 centimeters is the goal now, what we'd like to do is eventually evolve that so that the mobile devices are in line with what the fit-for-purpose point-of-sale devices are, and will always be at that 4 centimeter read range. Don't need to talk too much on that, particularly since my time's just about up. I will note that we've got on our website EMVCo Insights. Our annual report comes out February every year, talks about everything that we've accomplished in the past year and what we're planning on doing in the upcoming year, quick resource guide, and educational videos. So everything we communicate comes through LinkedIn. 79 associates I talked about, 359 subscribers. So again, if you have any interest in the organization, I'll be around at the networking event, etc. And final slide, these are all the different ways you can connect with us, interact with us, etc. So thank you for your attention. Hopefully I'll see you as the show progresses.